Hi folks, Mr. Ackerman here. Thanks for watching. The topic of this video is just a brief introduction to Photoshop editing and file handling. The purpose is to just get you started with simple edits to photos that will improve their appearance and also show you how to save those files so that you can actually revisit them at a later time to make changes, and also so that you don't alter the original, which is something we definitely never want to do. We always want to keep the original in its original shape, so we only work on copies. Anyway, before we get started, let's just get Photoshop launched. I've already done it, but you can search on your computer for Photoshop, double-click the icon, open that up, and the first thing that we're going to do is just have a quick little look around what you're going to see when you do that. How Photoshop opens will depend on how the application was set up and last used and so on. But usually you're going to see a bunch of tools along the side here, and across the top you'll see your usual menus and some more tools over here. And on the side here, I can't guarantee exactly what you're going to see when you open it up, but if you aren't seeing something that I'm talking about, or you have a favorite window that you want to see, you just go to Window here, and you can see, for example, Properties is checked, and that is right over here, Properties. If I click the X here, that goes away, and then I'm not going to see it there. Now I do see Layers here, which is up there. So that's all that is. You can turn on or off different view modes in the Windows menu. All right, so let's open a file that we're going to edit. You open the same way you would in Microsoft Word if you were opening a document. Go File, go Open, and then navigate to wherever your photo is. For me, it's this one, img_7264.jpg. That's a JPEG file, which is a very common file type for photos, and it's probably what's coming off of your camera or your phone. So we're going to go ahead and select that, and we're going to open it. And the first thing I want you to do when you open it is check the dimensions, the pixel dimensions of the file, to see whether it's kind of big enough to withstand the editing that we're going to do and display nicely, and maybe even print nicely. So go to File, go to File Info, and this is going to pop up. Make sure Camera Data is selected, and look down here at the image size. The image size is the number of pixels across by the number of pixels up and down, and as long as that's more than about 1,000 by 1,000, you should be okay. If it's much smaller than that, you're going to end up with a photo that looks kind of pixely in the end, and it may not display nicely, and it probably won't print very large without kind of starting to look awful. So if you're not getting numbers of at least 1,000 by 1,000, you might want to reconsider what you're editing, but if you are, then great. Go ahead, click OK, and let's get started with actual editing. But remember, we never edit the original. So what I should say is, before you get started with editing, you're going to save this as another file name so that we don't edit the original. So go down here to Save As, and then you see here's the file. Now we could rename this 7264 copy, but we're not even going to do that. We're actually going to save it as a different file format, a kind of file format which you can set down here. The file format is called a Photoshop document, and that will allow us to re-edit the photo later on. We'll be able to return to what we've done and make some changes if we change our minds. So click Photoshop. Now you're going to see the file extension has become PSD, Photoshop document, but the file name is the same. Here's the original 7264.jpg, and this is going to save right alongside that file. So you're going to have two files in the end, a JPEG and a PSD. Click Save, and notice up here that you're now working on the PSD. So now you're all set. First step in editing, we're going to crop and or rotate this photo. Maybe there's some things you want to take off the top or the sides or the bottom. Maybe you want to rotate a little bit. Like I noticed that this line here, which is a horizontal surface, it's a horizontal line, it should be horizontal, but I've tilted my camera by accident a little bit. It seems a bit lower on this side and a bit higher on that side. Even the vertical lines of the building are not quite vertical, but I know buildings should stand straight up. So this photo needs a bit of rotation. The way you rotate is by going along the side here, finding the crop tool, If you hover over any of these tools, then in a second or two, Photoshop will tell you what the tool is. This is the crop tool, so we make sure that's selected. And then if we just click anywhere on the photo, you get this grid. And then if you go out to the side here, you'll see a curved arrow, which allows me to rotate. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at the bottom here, and I'm trying to line up the bottom, that line there, with one of the horizontal grid lines in the crop tool, and it looks pretty lined up. So I'm going to go ahead and click Enter, and you can see that that rotated. Now, is it the way I want it to be? Let's go Edit, and let's try to undo crop. And you see that it rotates back to the way it was before. And if I go Edit, Redo Crop, which is, again, this shortcut here, Command or Control Z, depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC, it goes to there. So I'm just going to use the shortcut here to go back and forth quickly so that my eye can really see what I've done. And I think I like this final result. I might also want to crop a little bit off the sides or top. So again, click in the box or in the photo to activate the crop tool. And notice these little buttons or little handles that you can pull up and down. Same thing on the bottom here. Same thing on the sides. This is called cropping, and it's up to you how you want to crop your photo. Ideally, you shoot it in the way that you want it in the first place, but sometimes we crop because we change our mind later on, or because we need a photo to be printed and fit a certain frame. Anyway, let's say this is what I like, then hit Enter, and again, Control Z shows me what I started with and what I ended up with. So let's pretend I'm happy with this, and now the photo is cropped, it's rotated, I'm not working on the original, I'm all set to make some image adjustments which are going to make this photo look a little bit nicer than it already is. I'll show you what I mean in a moment. What are some of the things we might want to change? Maybe the photo seems a little too dark, so we want to brighten it up. Maybe we want to improve the contrast so that the colors and the tones are a little bit punchier. So these are some of the things I'm thinking of, but before we do that, there's a thing that you've got to do which you might not really notice needs to be done until I show it to you. It's called setting the white balance. To keep things simple, let me put it to you this way. These buildings, if you know them in Toronto, they're made of concrete, and concrete is gray. In other words, it has no color to it, it's just a tone. It's like a mixture of black and white to a certain tone. Now, I don't know about the monitor you're using at school or at home, but on my monitor, which is fairly accurate, these gray buildings, and even the gray concrete here, and the gray walkway here, and even the gray in the clouds is coming out a little bit yellowish, like a little kind of warm toned. And I know that that's not accurate. So I've got to correct the color. I've got to do what's called setting the white balance. Now here's what you do. You go to Layer, you go New Adjustment Layer, and you go to Curves. And when you do that, it'll allow you to rename the thing that you're doing. So we're just going to rename that. I'm going to type White Balance, and I'm going to click OK. And now over here in the Layers panel, you'll see that something that wasn't there a minute ago has suddenly appeared. It's called an adjustment layer, and it allows me to make a change to the photo that I can go back and revisit at a later time. It's like when you're typing in Word and you type a paragraph, that's not permanent. You can go back and change it. Same thing here. Now the controls for this layer are down here in Properties. You can see there's a complicated looking graph with a line and all these buttons. All I want you to do is look at this little icon here. It's called a dropper, like the little droppers that you have in chemistry class. And you just click on this middle one here, and then a little dropper is going to hover over the screen wherever you are. And what I want you to do is try clicking on different parts of the photo. Like, watch what happens if I click on the blue letter T. Whoa, things get pretty awful looking. This is not realistic. What about the red or pinkish O? Everything looks green now. What about the R? That looks pretty bad. In fact, if I click on anything that is colored, it's going to kind of ruin the photo, because using this dropper you are supposed to drop it or click on something that you know is either gray or white or black, something that's neutral and has no color. And remember, that was things like concrete. Watch what happens when I click on something concrete over here. Suddenly we're kind of back to normal, right? If I click on the clouds, which should be gray, that's another option. That makes the clouds, whatever you're clicking on, becomes neutral colored. But if I click on something that is not neutral, I get a bit of a weird effect happening, maybe a disaster, right? So back to things that are neutral, like concrete, the building here. Clouds can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes clouds light up with colors due to a sunrise or sunset or due to reflections, so you got to be a little careful with them. But I'm pretty happy with this. Now, if you go up here to the layer and you look at this little, it looks like an eye, and you turn it, you click it, when it's lit up, it shows you the effect that you've got going on with that layer. And if you turn it off, it goes back to the original. So this was the original, and this is what I corrected. I hope you can see that things that are gray have kind of cleaned up. They've become truly gray. And that before, there was kind of a color cast, as we call it, in the photo. So I've set the white balance, and that's now done. And if I want, I can always go back and change it by just highlighting the layer here, selecting that dropper tool, and clicking around. Next up, next adjustment. Go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. We're going to change the brightness and the contrast of the photos. So click on this. Brightness, contrast, that's fine. It'll remind me of what this is. Click OK. Now I got a new layer here. The layers are starting to stack up on top of the original layer here. So this one says Brightness, Contrast, and under Properties here, you have a slider called Brightness. If you go to the right, the photo gets brighter. You go to the left, it gets darker. Starts at 0 in this little window here, and I'm going to brighten up to where I think is right. Now what I usually do, start at 0, I go really quickly, brighter, brighter, brighter. I go a little bit too far, which I think is here, number 57, and then I dial it back a bit. So I always go a little bit farther than I think is normal, and then I dial it back. Let's try that again. So starting around 0, go brighter, brighter, brighter. I like it. A little bit further, dial it back, maybe there. And then I click on the eye for this layer to see what it's doing. It's brightening up the photo. It's making everything a little bit more attractive to the eye. The eye tends to be attracted to bright areas, so we don't want a dark photo. Now contrast, let's see what that does. To the right gives you more contrast. Darks become darker, brights become brighter, the range between them becomes more noticeable. The photo becomes a little bit punchier, but if you go too far, the darks become really dark, the lights become really light, and you kind of lose detail. And the same thing happens if you go all the way to the end, the left end. Things become kind of washed out. So we started at 0. I'm going to go to the right because I usually add contrast to a photo. I'm going to go till it's too much, and then I'm going to dial it back a bit. So maybe something like that. So do I like what I've done? Before, after. Now, overall, I like what happened. One thing I don't like is that the sky was kind of interesting. It was a little dramatic beforehand. When I brightened it and increased the contrast, I lost some of that. In a later video, I'm going to show you how to apply an effect like what I just did to certain parts of the photo, but not others. For now, we're going to have to live with it. It is what it is, as they say. What are some other changes I can make? Let's go Layer, New Adjustment Layer one more time. And we've done Brightness, Contrast. We used curves to set the white balance. Here's one, Vibrance. Click OK. It allows you to kind of make colors, as the name suggests, more vibrant. If I go really far here and then turn it on and off, look at what's happened. Look at the areas with color, like the letters of the Toronto sign down here. Before, after, before, after. You might notice it more in the reflection down here than you do up in the actual sign. So look down here at the reflection while I turn this on and off. Before, after, before, after. And if you want, be careful with the saturation slider. It tends to quickly go a bit too far, but you can increase color saturation Now let's do a before and after. Before, after. That's kind of nice. The colors are all becoming more saturated. So here are 3 simple adjustments that we can use to make the photo look good. To show you what this photo looked like beforehand, I can control-click on each of my layers here. So you see what I've done? I've held down the control key, command on a Mac, and I've clicked on all the layers. And now what you can do is group those into one layer. You do that by going to Layer, and you go to Group Layers, Command or Control G. And what that does now is it puts these all into a group with a little arrow. If you click the arrow, it shows you what's in the group. Click it again and it just hides them. And now I can turn them all on and off at the same time. So ready? This is the after photo. That's the before and after. Like I said, I'm happy with how the grayness of the concrete now is truly gray. Before it wasn't. It was a little bit too yellow or maybe a bit of green in there. Everything's brighter and punchier. I like that. I don't like that I lost detail in the sky. I'm going to show you how to fix that in a later video. But for now, I think we have a photo that overall is better than what we started with. And so now it's time to save. So go File and Save. And now it's going to ask you, because we're in Photoshop format, which is not your typical format for a photo, we got to decide if we want to make it more compatible with other applications that might use this. And I think you might as well say yeah. So click OK, and you're good to go. Now, if I go back to where this file was, this is the original, the JPEG. Look at it. It's 2.4 megabytes, which is a reasonable size. But the PSD, which is the new one, is 60 megs. It is almost like 20-something, 25 times bigger than the original. That's the drawback of PSDs. They are huge. You cannot upload this to a website. If the website even will display it, it will take forever to load. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back to Photoshop, and we have saved it as a PSD. You can see here. But we're also going to File, Save As, and we're going to go back to JPEG. But we don't want it to conflict with the original JPEG, so we're going to click up here, and maybe we're going to rename this Edit 1. And then we're going to click Save. And then it's going to say, well, what quality level do you want to use? The larger the quality level, all the way up to 12, the bigger the file will get. And the smaller, lower the quality level, the smaller it'll get. Let's try saving this as a level 3 and just see what happens. So click OK. And let's go in here. Here it is. There's the PSD. Here's the original JPEG at 2.4 megs. And the edit, look at that. It's 632 kilobytes, which for web use is great. It will upload quickly. It'll display quickly. And what I'm going to do very quickly, just to show you that this is not a terrible file, is go into Photoshop, I'm going to File, Open, and I'm going to open that edited JPEG. And let's see what happens. I'm now looking at the JPEG. I'm going to zoom in with Control or Command plus. And what do you see? As I get in there, it looks a little pixely, right? If I go back to the PSD, to the, where was I? The R in the sign there. Let's compare. Let's zoom in a lot to the letter R. My zoom level, by the way, is shown down here, 500%. I go here. I'm going to zoom in the same. I'm at 400. Now I'm at 500. Here's the R. So here's the R as my saved smaller file, and here it is as the original. I think you can see this is nicer. Look at the people down here. Look at the detail. Now look in here. They're not quite as nice, but no one's ever going to look this closely on a website in all likelihood, so you're fine. Control or Command minus to zoom back out, and you're good to go. So when you upload things to a website or you submit them in an assignment, you'll often want to make things a little bit smaller, and that's the way you do it. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. We will learn a lot more about Photoshop editing at a later date. But for now, I hope you enjoy. Go tackle some of your photos that you've been taking, improve their appearance. I look forward to seeing them in class. Thanks for watching and have a great day.